Hello, my name is Terry Kastner. I'm the Executive Director for the Northwest Wall and Ceiling Bureau in Seattle. And today I'd like to talk to you about the labor productivity survey that we're asking all SWACA members to participate in. So just some brief information on labor productivity in the past. Prior to 2009, the Wall and Ceiling Contractor had only NECA, MCAA, and the Army Corps of Engineers publications to assist with producing a claim for compensation. In 2006, the NWCB commissioned the original labor productivity study. In 2009, the study was published as The Impact to Labor Productivity in Steel Framing and the Installation and Finishing of Gypsum Board. The study examined over 225 projects and proved statistically that when certain variables existed, plant productivity could be adversely affected. Although the original study proved that the existence of variables would affect productivity, the extent to which productivities could not easily be estimated was not provided. In 2017, the NWC published the user guide to the study, which provided a method to easily estimate the extent of the impact and the labor cost associated. So why is there a request for a new labor productivity study? Although the labor productivity study and user guide have been used successfully in the Northwest, it's viewed as a regional document, and its use in other parts of the country have been very limited. By conducting a new survey, gathering information from projects around the country, the new edition will eventually be recognized as a national publication for the impact to labor productivity in the wall and ceiling industry. As I mentioned, it's been used successfully here in the Northwest as one of the tools to provide information for a successful claim. Others across the country, like Tim Weiss in St. Louis, have also used the labor productivity study successfully. But again, we need your help now to make this a national publication. So how is the information for the labor productivity seminar going to be gathered? Well, in 2006 through 2009, it was a very time-consuming process. Interns traveled to various branches in Washington, Oregon, and California to interview and assist company representatives in gathering and providing the required information. Today, each project can take as little as 20 minutes by filling out the online survey form that we're going to be going over shortly. Now, how many projects are needed? As I mentioned, there were 226 projects in the 2009 survey. So we're asking that you give us as many as possible. We need to exceed that number. We're going to ask you to provide information on not only bad jobs, but also on good jobs and average jobs, submitted in those three categories: a good job, a bad job, and an ugly job. So we want good, bad, and the ugly. Now, who is responsible for information gathering? Basically, the executive directors. You are responsible for gathering the information. Now, how you do that is up to you. You can work with the company representatives in your areas to fill out the survey forms, or it's been my experience that you can just basically provide this tutorial to the construction companies, and those project managers, estimators, or company representatives can go ahead and fill out the survey form too. You might have to help them a little bit, but it's very, very easy, as you'll see, to fill out the forms. I do want to mention that all of the information provided on the survey is not going to be shared with anybody else. The projects that you submit are kept extremely confidential. Now, the duration for gathering this information, we're going to hopefully end the survey on September 30th. So you have through the month of August and through September to get all of the information in. Okay. If the EDs have any questions at all, please contact Amy or myself. The information is on the project information that you see on your screen at this time. My phone number and email are right there, as well as Allison's. And Neil O'Connor is more than willing to help also. So hopefully you had an opportunity to read the information that you see right here about why we're gathering this information, about what we had done in the past, and also Tim Weiss's endorsement of the existing labor productivity study. So with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the survey and show you how easy it is to accomplish. All we have to do is hit the Start Here button, and the survey form will come up. It's coming up on my big screen now. I'm going to bring it down onto here, so hopefully you can see that. And we're going to hit the OK button in just a second. It says project information, contact information is for the purpose of questions or clarifications on this survey. Your information will not be shared with others. Again, it is not necessary, as you'll see, to include the legal name of the project. You can give the project name, assign it a new name, or give it a number, as long as you have a reference for that project if we have to call with any questions about that one. So I'm going to hit the OK button and we'll start the survey. The first thing we ask for is what area you are responding from. In this case, we are in the Northwest, so I'll just go ahead and use the Northwest Contractors Association here in the Seattle area. Gives me number 1. Next, we're going to break it down into project sizes. We've broken it down into either $100,000 through $1 million, $1 million through $5 million, and over $5 million. For this example, I'm going to choose a $1 million to $5 million project. Now we're asking you what the result of this project was. Was it a good project for you, an average project, or a bad project? Now, good projects are pretty easy. As you'll see, an average project is not too difficult, but a bad project, that can be kind of more difficult at times. So we're going to choose bad project. And I'm going to provide my respondent's name. You can see it popped up, Terry Kastner, here before. That's because I've used this survey before, and it'll do the same thing for you. And I'm with the Northwest Wall and Ceiling Bureau. And the project name or number. Again, you don't have to use the project name specifically if you want to keep that confidential. That's cool. I would assign a number in that case. I'm going to assign number 1 as the project. Okay. And it starts with some other questions. But before we go on to this, I mentioned that this is going to be what I consider a bad project. And I consider this a bad project because the general contractor did not have the exterior curtain wall installed in a timely manner. It was not there when I started or completed the framing. It was not there when I installed or completed most of the drywall application. And it was in place when I started doing some of the finishing for the most part. So you can well imagine how difficult and how bad a project can be when the exterior curtain wall is in place. My framing had to be held back a minimum of 6 feet from the leading edge. My drywall had to be terminated a minimum of 8 feet from the leading edge to protect it from inclement weather. Finishing, again, we were able to begin the finishing once the building was more or less enclosed. So that wasn't impacted nearly as much. Now at the exterior curtain wall, I had framing for a sill. I had framing for the soffit, gypsum wall board at those soffits and sills, of course, and had hard lids coming into those areas too. So it was really a large effect on my framing and my drywall installation. Okay, back to the survey form. We ask on number 7, how many weeks were your crews supposed to be on site according to the schedule? Again, you'll see numbers that pop up here because I've taken this survey before. I'm going to say that this project took me, was anticipated to take 50 weeks. How many weeks were your crews actually on site? Like I said, it was a bad project, so I'm going to say it took 75 weeks. The original budgeted cost, okay? No commas or anything like that. I'm going to say this was a $3 million project. And again, I have no commas or anything in here. The projected cost at completion, I will say it was $4,500,000. This was not a good job. And the projected final change order amount, I'm going to say it was $1,500,000. Okay, then the type of project, we're asking for the type of project also. Was it a school K-12? Or was it an institutional project, a manufacturing project, a commercial retail, high-tech, or residential? In this case, I'm going to say it was a school, a K-12. The type of work, was it fast track, private sector, public sector, GCCM, design build assist, or some other? Well, I'm going to say this was a public sector. Going on to the next. It asked me about the scope of work that I performed on this project. Now I did do framing, I did do drywall application, I did do tape and finish, and I did not do any paint. So I won't check the paint category. Hitting OK, moving on to the next. It asked me for values or units for our specific task. So for framing, it wants to know the estimated quantity in lineal feet. I'm going to say it was 10,000 lineal feet of framing I was going to do. Now we want to include all of your framing, right? So estimated productivity in for our framing, I'm going to say that was approximately, let's say 65 lineal feet per man per day is what we bid for this project. The actual productivity, I'm going to say that was somewhere around 45 lineal feet on an average. Going on to next, the owner-related issues. Now that we've talked about one of the tasks we performed is framing, it's going to ask me a series of questions that have to do with the variables or the impacts that could have affected my framing. We're not talking about drywall installation at this time. We're not talking about tape finishing. We're just going to be talking about those impacts and how they affected my framing, okay? On a scale of 1 to 5, we're checking here, 1 of course being the least and 5 being the most severe. First question asked is an owner-related issues with framing, okay? This is owner-related issues with framing. So the construction documents, rate the overall quality of the plans and specifications relative to what you think is required to execute your scope of work. Whereas it standard of the industry requires minimal requests for information from the designer, could not be built without some direction from the designer, not unusual, required weekly RFIs, to execute your scope of work, almost daily RFIs, or most severe, the final project is so different from the original design documents. Now, in my case, the construction documents were rather good. The only problem was, of course, the general contractor failing to get the exterior wall in place prior to beginning my work. So I'm going to say that more or less it could not be built without some direction from the designer, which I feel is fairly normal. So hitting OK takes me to the next question. Number 17 deals with overzealous and unreasonable construction administration. Rate the owner's construction administration on a project, which includes overzealous inspections, unreasonable safety requirements, possibly COVID-19 restrictions, or any other interference from the owner's personnel that distracts or impacts workers' productivity. Now, I didn't have any problems with overzealous inspections. COVID-19, I'm going to say, wasn't a factor at this time, so I didn't have some unusual safety requirements I had to adhere to. So there was little or no interference, higher than normal interference, strict adherence to requirements and rejecting an abnormal amount of work, daily run-ins with inspectors and other owner-controlled administrators. Owner-controlled interference makes job almost unbearable. In this case, I'm going to say there was little or no interference and check that block. Okay, the next question deals with weather. Rate the weather during the project relative to what the estimator expected when the job was bid, to the extent that weather affected the worker productivity on the project. Okay, the first least is no unaccounted for in the estimate or unusual weather events that may have affected labor productivity. Minor changes in the weather-related environment, for example, a push from summer work to fall work, a major change in weather-related environment, multiple work stoppages due to weather, job halted for multiple days, i.e. Hurricane Katrina type event. In my case, again, the exterior curtain wall was not in place when it was supposed to be on the original schedule. So we were framing in weather, we were hanging board in weather because the exterior curtain wall wasn't there. So I'm going to say there was a major change in weather-related environment. Hitting the OK button takes me to question number 19. That deals with work stoppages, acts of God, or the public enemy. Rate whether work stoppages on the job affected your labor production. Again, mine was related, my impacts were related specifically to the exterior curtain wall. I didn't really have any stoppages. There were not really, there might have been some minor work stoppages for your crew, major work stoppages, major events, i.e. labor dispute or something that shuts down the job for a significant amount of time. I'm going to say, possibly there were minor work stoppages, again, as it related to the framing and as it related to what has affected my framing, and that is the lack of exterior curtain wall. Hitting OK takes us to question number 2. This is access to the job site or work issues. Access to the job site or work covers a broad number of issues, such as the adequacy and location of parking relative to the job site, adequacy of vertical transportation of multi-story buildings. Boy, we've sure experienced that. Location of and adequacy of the restrooms, eating areas, and other support facilities. So again, least severe is no unaccounted for access problems, minor access issues, significant access issues, major unaccounted for access issues, requiring contractor to provide alternative access, and access frequently blocked. In this case, we had good access to the work. We just could not complete the work because of the exterior curtain wall. So I'm going to say there were minor access issues. Next question. Owner supplied, contractor installed materials. Rate how much your project labor production was impacted by the owner supplied, contractor installed materials, either not working with the specified installed products or arriving on the project out of sequence. Now, this is owner supplied, contractor installed. Now, I didn't do any work directly for the owner, so I'm going to say this is not applicable. The exterior curtain wall was a general contractor's responsibility, and he failed in getting the required exterior curtain wall in place at the proper time, not the owner. The next question has to do with other subcontractors working directly for the owner. And I would consider those things like, say, cabinetry or possibly specialized carpeting or flooring installations that those individuals work directly for the owner and not directly to the general contractor. On this project, there were no subcontractors that were working directly for the owner, so I'm going to hit not applicable. Going on to the next question, it brings us to questions or impacts related now to the general contractor. We're done with the owner. We're now on to the general contractor. And again, we're dealing with framing issues related to impacts responsible of the general contractor. So coordination. This factor describes the coordination problems experienced by you that are the responsibility of the general contractor. So coordination problems. On this job, again, my issue was with the exterior curtain wall. The other aspects of the job, the coordination was just fine. And so I didn't have a real problem with coordination. The options for coordination are no coordination problems, minimal coordination problems, occasional coordination problems, moderate coordination problems, i.e. first come, first serve, we've all seen that, or severe coordination problems. On this project, I'm going to say it was minimum coordination problems. Hitting the OK brings me to question number 24 about the building environment. This factor describes the actual working environment relative to what the estimator expected. It includes but is not limited to heat and humidity. My options are least severe environmental conditions were no different from plan, slight or moderate differences from plan, major differences from plan, severe problems with heat, cold, and water, work stopped due to the interior environment. Now, mine were interesting. I had to deal with weather-related problems because the exterior curtain wall wasn't there for framing and the installation of drywall. So I would say there were major differences from expectations. Not all of the work was affected by the exterior curtain wall not being in place, but all of that work that was associated with the exterior curtain wall was affected. Okay, the next question is GC contract administration. This factor characterizes the general contractor's contract administration during the course of the project, i.e. GC met or beat all contract timelines, schedules routinely updated and followed, minimum delays in the review process of submittals or others, RFIs. Review and approval process was delayed, GC in a reactive mode. Review and approval process is unpredictable, or poor GC contract administration process. On my project, I had no problems with the submittal process. RFIs were answered in a timely manner. Again, it was just the absence of the exterior curtain wall that was my big problem. So I'm going to go GC met or beat all contractual timelines. That's not really the case. If that was the case, I'd have a curtain wall in place. So I'm going to change that, and I'm going to go with minimum delays in the review process and leave it at that. Next question goes to congestion. We all have experienced congestion on the project. This factor describes the relative amount of congestion on the project, whether the congestion is caused by crowding or acceleration of your own workforce or others, stacking of the trades, or crowding due to materials, your own or others, and equipment in your workspace that your crews have to work around. Your choices are never a problem, moderate but not highly unusual, highly congested, extremely congested, and consistently blocking access to your work, forced to move material out of the way. Again, this is subjective to the point where this is you. We're asking you what your impression of this impact was on your framing at the time. Now, for my case, I would say it was moderate but not highly unusual, the congestion, associated with that framing area, the exterior curtain wall. Other than that, I didn't have really any problems with congestion on the project. So hitting OK takes me to the next question, dealing with fragmentation. This factor describes the degree to which the project was fragmented or broken up instead of being executed in a fluid manner from the start to finish for any given activity. Now, my schedule showed me beginning my tasks and completing my tasks in a very organized manner. That was the case for most everything except for that work associated with the exterior curtain wall. And I'm going to say then that more than half of the work that I had to perform was performed out of sequence. I'm not going to say virtually no continuity or flow to the work, because there was other work I could do, and there was a flow to that. That brings me to the next question, number 28, general contractor supplied materials. This factor describes the extent to which the GC supplied materials impacted your workflow and durations. Again, that was an effect on my project. So choices are everything there on time and stocked readily for install per the schedule. Added cost due to having to receive and store materials until ready for the install. Not necessarily the case in our case. Some materials late created some go backs. Significant amount of such materials were either late or ordered incorrectly. Majority of such materials were either late or ordered incorrectly. I'm going to say that we're at probably a level 4 severity. Significant amount of such materials were either late or ordered incorrectly. Next question takes me to subcontractors controlled by the general contractor, if they were problematic. Again, I'll only say this, the general contractor is responsible for the other subcontractors. If their materials installations aren't accomplished prior to your scheduled activity, sure, it's their fault, but ultimately it's the general contractor's fault. And that's who we would go to for compensation. So your choice is there. The factor describes the actual working environment relative to how other subcontractors working for the general contractor affected my scope of work. Great team, very few problems. Few problems relating to delays in completing preceding work. More problems relating to delays in completing preceding work. Significant portions of the work had some delay or damage and multiple comeback issues. Virtually no continuity to the flow of the work. We've seen this on some projects, and that's scary when there's virtually no continuity or flow to the work. In my case, the subcontractor, and again, we're talking the subcontractors working for the general contractor, were not a problem on the project. The electricians were able to get their installations accomplished according to the schedule, except for the exterior curtain wall, but not their problem, right? HVAC, not a problem. Plumbing, not a problem. All others were really not a problem. So I'm going to say there were very few problems relating to delays in completing preceding work. GC schedule reality. This factor describes the extent to which the general contractor's schedule was based on reality and included such factors as proper periods of logical workflow, as well as the level of input to the schedule, either requested or accepted by the general contractor from your team. Did they ask for your input, and was your input basically followed? Your choices are good scheduling, well thought out, minimal problems due to bad logic, missed tasks, or too short of durations, problems arising from lack of subcontractor input and coordination, a significant portion of scope of work outside of original scheduled durations and timeframes, or most of the project unable to be worked in original scheduled durations and timeframes. Okay, for the most part, the schedule was fine for all activities except for the exterior curtain wall. So I'm going to say problems arising from lack of subcontractor input and coordination, because they did ask our input, how do we basically solve the problem that we created by not having the exterior curtain wall in place? So we gave them our input, and basically they had little control over that. They would go as quickly as possible once the materials arrived on site for the installation. So it's either going to be problems arising from lack of subcontractor input and coordination, or minimal problems due to bad logic, missed tasks, or too short of durations. So somewhere in here is what I was going to say, and I'll go ahead and stay with this one there. Next one has to do with communication. The factor describes the level of open communication from the general contractor to your team. Again, the communication on this project was good. The contractor was very upfront. We're not going to have the exterior curtain wall in place. We're going to do our best to get it there prior to hanging, but during your framing activities, it's going to be absent, and you're going to have to hold your framing back. But we hope to get that, hopefully in place by the drywall installation. Well, that didn't happen, as I mentioned. But again, the communication was not bad at all. So I'm going to say communications were okay and required few clarifications. I can go on to the next. Now, the next brings us back to the drywall application. So that's all of the questions that we needed for our framing activities, the impacts to our framing activities. That was the total extent of the questions. But now we have to answer those same questions for our drywall application, and then we'll answer those questions for our taping applications, or taping phase also, because it's very important. The impacts can be totally different, as you'll see. As I mentioned, framing was affected by the lack of the exterior curtain wall. Hanging was affected by the lack of exterior curtain wall, but the taping activities were not as affected. So it's important that we ask that for each of these. So looking for quantities for the drywall installation, we're going to say that the estimated quantity of drywall was 2,500,000. The estimated productivity was about 1,000 square feet per man or per worker per day. The actual productivity was down around 850 square feet per man per day. Okay, there were other areas where we were able to meet our planned productivities that were not related to the exterior curtain wall, but on the most part, we dropped down to 850 square feet per man day. It could have been less than that, but that was the average that we achieved. Going on to next, it takes us to the questions that factors, impacts that are owner-related issues with the drywall application. Hitting OK takes us to the first question. Again, these are the same questions that we answered before for the framing activities. So we're getting pretty used to these. So it starts to become relatively easy to breeze through these things. So the construction documents, as I mentioned, the construction documents were just fine. I'm going to say that they could not be built with some direction from the designer, because I feel that that's generally the case and was the case here. Overzealous and unreasonable construction administration was not a problem. So I'm going to say there was little or no interference with the drywall application associated with overzealous and unreasonable contract administration. The weather, just as with framing, we're exposed to weather right now. So I'm going to say this is a major change in the weather-related environment from what we had anticipated during the bid process. Work stoppages, acts of God or the public enemy. Again, we had minor work stoppages, I would say, but nothing major. So I'm going to hit minor work stoppages. Access to the job site or work issues. Again, just as with framing, we didn't really have problems accessing the area. So I'm going to say there was minor access issues, just as I did with framing. Now, owner supplied, again, contractor installed materials. We discussed this. We did not do any work directly for the owner. So I'm going to say that that is not applicable. Takes us to owner directed contractors. Were other contractors working directly for the owner? Again, we discussed that earlier and that was not the case. So I'm going to hit not applicable and go on to the next question, which brings us to the general contractor again. Okay, general contractor issues with the drywall application. What factors that the general contractor was responsible for affected our drywall application? First question, coordination. This factor describes the coordination problems experienced by you that are the responsibility of the general contractor. Same as before, with framing, I would say there were minimal coordination problems. For the building environment, we discussed this. I don't have an exterior curtain wall in, so I'm going to say there are major differences, again, from expectations. It should have all been enclosed prior to us even beginning the framing. It was not. Definitely by the drywall application, it should have been enclosed. So major differences from expectations. GC contract administration, that was not a problem. I would say, again, just as I did before, minimal delays in the review process. Moving on to the next question, congestion. Just as with the framing, we did not suffer from congestion of other subcontractors, workforce and or materials. So I'm going to say that was not really a problem. Moving on to the next question has to deal with fragmentation. Again, this factor describes the degree to which the project was fragmented or broken up instead of being executed in a fluid manner from start to finish. Okay, that was definitely the problem on this job, the exterior curtain wall not in place. So I'm going to say, just as I did with the framing, because my drywall application is affected just as it was with framing, more than half of the work was performed out of sequence. Now, general contractor supplied materials. This factor describes the extent to which the GC supplied materials impacted our workflow and durations. Again, exterior curtain wall wasn't there, just as it was not there for the framing. So I'm going to say a significant amount of such material were either late or ordered incorrectly, just as I did for the framing portion. Other subcontractors controlled by the general contractor, we talked about this. Actually, there are very, very few problems related to other subcontractors. So the GC schedule reality having to do with the drywall installation. Again, it wasn't really bad scheduling. It was the absence of the other work that was a problem. So I'm going to say that we're going to stick with, we're going to go with significant portions of scope of work outside of original schedule durations and timeframes because he didn't have the exterior curtain wall in place. So that pushed a lot of work off. Communication, the communication was fine, required very little other clarifications. Going to next, we get to taping and finishing. We've finished now those questions related to the drywall application. Now it's going to ask us about the taping and finishing. So it wants to know the quantity in square feet for taping and finishing. Again, let's make sure that we get all of the time and quantities in here for these activities. If you have any questions about exactly how to do this, please, just give me a call, shoot me an email. So I'm going to say we're finishing 2 million square feet of board. Our productivity is going to be 1,100 square feet per worker per day. And we achieved, it wasn't too bad. I'm going to say that we got about 1,000 square feet per man per day. Again, most of the tape finished, the exterior curtain wall was in place. After the drywall was installed, there was still major impact of the drywall installation, but when it came to the taping phase, most of the building was enclosed. We had some little hiccups here and there, but for the most part, it definitely was not affected as much as the framing and the hanging. So labor productivity, owner-related issues with tape and finishing. Again, keeping in mind that this has to do with just the taping and the finishing. How are the construction documents related to the tape and finishing? I would say standard to the industry, no problem. Overzealous and unreasonable construction administration. That was not a problem at all with the taping and finishing, little or no interference. Weather, okay, remember this was big as far as drywall installation. and framing went. So rate the weather during the project relative to what the estimator expected when the job was bid, to the extent that weather affected the worker productivity on the job as it relates to taping and finishing, okay? My options again were no unaccounted for or unusual weather events that affected labor productivity, okay? Minor change in weather-related environment, major change, which is what we had before, multiple work stoppages due to weather, Hurricane Katrina event. I would say there were just minor changes in weather-related environment because it wasn't completely enclosed, and we did have a few issues with the tape finish related to the interior environment, but overall it was not too bad. Work stoppages, again, there were no stoppages that affected my tape and finish. Access to job site or work issues, no unaccounted for access problems related to my taping. Going on, next one, owner supplied, contractor installed materials. Okay, for the owner installed materials, we didn't really have any, again, as we discussed, so that's not applicable. For the owner directed contractors, there were no contractors that worked directly for the owner, again, not applicable. Going on to the next, which brings us to the general contractor issues related to taping and finishing. First question had to do with coordination. Again, no coordination problems, minimum coordination problems. I would say minimum having to do with the tape finish. There were some coordination issues, but they really weren't major at that point too. Building environment, the factor describes the actual working conditions relative to what the estimator expected. Now we had major difference before and we don't with the tape finish now. Like I said, framing is done. The drywall installation is pretty much complete prior to the or now that the exterior curtain wall is in place. It's not affecting our tape finishing that bad. So the environmental conditions were no different from plan or slight or moderate differences from plan. You know, it was very, very little. So I'm going to go no different from plan, really. The GC contract administration, as far as it relates to the taping finish, was not a problem. Minimal delays in review process. Congestion was not a problem for the tape finishing. Again, you know, they were running a good job as it relates to everything else. And once we got to the tape finish thing, everything was falling back more or less kind of on schedule or on the revised schedule, shall we say, associated with the exterior curtain wall. So our taping activities were able to find a good flow. But so I'm going to say, you know, I hate to say never a problem because that's really not the case. I'm going to say moderate, but not highly unusual. Actually, I'm going to go back because, you know, having to deal with congestion, I'm going to say it was never really a problem with congestion. You see, you can go back and re-click it. Fragmentation, again, there was a little bit of fragmentation because, you know, that's not unusual. I'm going to say there were all activities were executed as planned or moderately fragmented, some remobilizations. I'm going to say that because there were some areas where they were just buttoning up that we had to go back and clean up. General contractor supplied materials as it relates again to the taping activities. Oh, let's see. The factor describes the extent to which the GC supplied materials impacted your workflow and durations for the taping activity. Basically, when we got to the taping activities, there weren't a lot of problems. So some materials were late, created some go backs, added cost due to having some materials. Now, you know, it was fine. When we got to the taping activity, it was really quite fine. Other subcontractors controlled by the general contractor. We had no problems with the electricians, especially during the taping phase, or anybody else. Their work was done at a timely manner. So I'm going to say few problems relating to delays in completing the preceding work. GC schedule reality. Once we got to this point then too, we had coordinated how we were going to attack the project and finish it up as efficiently as we possibly could, and they took our advice too. So there were minimal problems due to bad logic when it got to the taping phase. Communication, again, communication was just fine, not a problem. Going to the next question. Has to do with ancillary scopes of work. So now we finished all the questions related to the taping activities. Now the questionnaire is, did you do other work on the project That was significant that we should include also. Was there ancillary work that you did? And we did do some ancillary work. So I hit yes, and we go to next and asks us what ancillary work was that? Was it fireproofing? We didn't do any fireproofing. Was it access flooring? In our case, no. Was it air and weather barrier building envelope systems? In our case, no, but that could be very, very significant. Insulation? No, we didn't do the insulation. Doors, frames, and hardware. We did doors, frames, and hardware. So I'm going to click that one. Finished carpentry, we didn't do any finished carpentry. And acoustical ceilings, we didn't do that either. Now, if we had, you can click all of these if necessary. But in our case, we just did doors, frames, and hardware. So I'm going to go on to the next question. And it's going to say, when reporting quantity and unit for ancillary work, you may use combination of numbers and text, which is different than before, right? But we're going for the ancillary scope right now, doors, frames, and hardware. I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to ask me for the values, of course, or the units. The estimated units, I'm going to say we had about 200 door frames and doors to install. The estimated productivity was 12 per worker per day. The actual productivity, you know, it was pretty good. I'm going to say it was around 11. It was not bad at all. You know, it's a little bit under our estimate, but it wasn't too bad. So next. Owner-related issues associated with the door frames and hardware. Just like we did for our framing, hanging, and taping, it's going to ask us questions about the owner impacts. Construction documents rate the overall quality of the plans related to the installation of the door frames. I'm going to say it was standard to the industry, not a problem at all. Overzealous and unreasonable construction administration, little or no interference, again, associated with the door frame installations. Weather, you know, the door frames, although we were exposed to the weather as far as our framing and hanging goes, the effect of the weather to the installation of the door frames was minimal. Most of the door frames were installed in the corridors. There were some that were held up because of their location to the exterior curtain wall, but for the most part, the door frames could be installed. So I'm going to say it was minor change in weather-related environment. For example, a push to summer or fall, or in this case, most of the door frames could be installed on the corridor side. Work stoppages, acts of God, there were no stoppages associated with the door frames. Access to the job site or worker issues, you know, there was minor access issues, I would say, because there always seems to be when you're responsible for the doors, frames, and hardware of getting those to the location. For some reason, there's always a little bit of problems. So I can say there were minor issues. Owner supplied, contractor installed materials. We did not do any work directly for the owner, again, as we've mentioned before, so that's not applicable. And we're going to say owner directed contractors. There were none on the project, again, not applicable. Going to the next question. Goes to the general contractor, issues related to the doors, frames, and hardware. Rankings again, 1 to 5. Okay. Takes us to the first question on coordination with the general contractor. As far as the door frames were concerned, the coordination with the general contractor was fairly normal. I'm going to say minimal coordination problems. The building environment, again, this is a major issue with the framing and the installation of drywall. Framing because we couldn't get to the exterior and finish the framing. Drywall, basically the same thing. But for the installation of the door frames, you know, it was slight and moderate, you know, differences from the plan. Most of the door frames, 90% of the door frames at least, were in the corridor walls, which we were able to frame, hang, and install the door frames. So GC contract administration was not a problem, minimal delays in the review process. Congestion for the door frames, not really a factor at all. You know, I'm going to say never a problem for the door frame installations. They went quite well. Fragmentation, a little bit. Again, not all the door frames could be installed. We had to go back and install some door frames associated with the exterior curtain wall. So I would say it was moderately fragmented, some remobilizations, but not terrible at all. The general contractor supplied materials. Again, as far as it related to the hollow metal door frames and doors, yes, the general contractor was responsible for ordering those, and very luckily, he ordered them at a timely manner that they were on site. So it wasn't a problem with that. And I would say that everything there on time and stock ready to install per the schedule. That was just fine. As far as it relates to the door frames, again, I mean, we were talking about as it relates to those activities. Other subcontractors controlled by the general contractor. Do the other subcontractors affect the installation of my doors, frames, and hardware? And I would say no. There were few problems relating to delays in completing the preceding work. Few electrician problems, but other than that, not a big problem. GC schedule reality, as it relates to the door frames, it was minimal problems, okay? And communication, again, the communication was okay and required very few clarifications. So that was pretty darn good too. So after communication, it comes to this question where it asks about the schedules. What this is telling me is I'm almost done with the survey. Were 3-week coordination schedules distributed? Yes, on this project, the general contractor did a good job of revising the schedule and providing 3-week look-ahead schedules. Was the overall project schedule distributed? Yes, it was. He did a good job doing that. And were schedule updates distributed? And yes, they were. He did a good job doing that. Now you notice it doesn't say next here, it says done. When I hit done, I'm done with this survey and it gets submitted. So once I'm done, you'll see what happens. It says done. It says, thank you very much for completing our survey. Click on done below to get back to the beginning of the survey to submit another job. So this will bring you back and you can do it again for a good or a average job to go along with this ugly job that you've just finished turning in. So you can do that right away just by hitting done, and it takes you back to the survey again. Or at this point, you can get out of the survey and come back at a later time. Again, I want to encourage you to turn in as many projects as you can. Again, last time there were 226 projects that were surveyed. We need to get at least that many to make the survey very, very worthwhile. Again, if you have any questions about how to fill out the survey or any questions related to the labor productivity study that the Bureau has put out, please shoot me an email. I'll send you a digital copy of our labor productivity study and the user guide for your use, and maybe have a little chat with you about how successful we've been in using our labor productivity study and the user guide and the spreadsheets, the Excel spreadsheets that we have created from the labor information in the user guide on the mathematical method to determine what the lost hours would be and the cost associated with that, which is very, very simple to use too. So again, please complete the surveys, do the surveys, and work with the executive directors. And any questions, go ahead and get a hold of Amy or Allie and myself and Neil, and we'll do whatever we can to help you out. So thanks very much, everybody. And we will end the email or the Zoom meeting at this time. Bye-bye.